Good.
Okay, Kevin is recording. All right. Good evening. Before we start, I just want to read something. In response to COVID-19 pandemic, the Plattsburgh Town Board is using adaptive practices in the interest of public health. The Association of Towns has provided us guidance along with our attorney. We are using Zoom, which is a remote meeting software, to conduct our meetings. The town of Plattsburgh is still learning this technology, and to allow ample time to log in on the software, we have activated the software at 5:30 with the town board meeting officially starting at 6:30, and that's when the town board has taken on official town business. Before we begin tonight, I did want to have a moment of silence in reflection. The governor issued that the flag be flown at half-staff. To date, over 7,000 fellow New Yorkers have perished due to COVID-19. So if you could join me in a brief moment of silence and reflection of those individuals, and actually all those around the world that have been impacted that both by their own death and the families and friends that are missing them in their absence now. Thank you. Before I get into some of the items, I promised folks that I would continue to try to keep you up to date on some of the things that are going on in the state, in the county, in the town, and then we can get into some of the items of business more specifically to the town. Governor Cuomo did direct schools and non-essential businesses to stay closed for an additional 2 weeks through April 28th. We continue to be at 50% staffing. We are using the Teams model to make sure that we have coverage of the essential services that are required and known to be of good local government, like our water infrastructure or highways, etc. New York State, $600 in addition to the weekly unemployment benefits will be made available to New Yorkers, and the period covered by unemployment benefits is being extended for another 13 weeks for a total of 39 weeks now. New Yorkers who have recovered from COVID-19 are encouraged to donate blood. If you go on the governor's website, there is a link for that. New York State is also increasing the maximum fines for violations of the state's social distancing protocol from $500 to $1,000 to help address the lack of adherence to social distance protocols. I'll get into that a little bit more as it relates to how we're addressing that locally. And Governor Cuomo has issued an executive order to bring additional funeral directors to help with the high number of deaths. The reason that I bring that particular bullet up to you is we see an ongoing and changing landscape with this. I did talk with Connie Goddard, our receiver, as it relates to the mausoleum. We had a good conversation, and I'm confident that we have a date in front of us now. Before, I've been saying it's likely that that date is going to move, it's going to move, it's going to move. She has all but wrapped up her paperwork that she needs to do, and in fact, the staff are now on the payroll over in Ellenburg. Doesn't mean that we're in full execution of the receivership. There was a number of reasons that they did that, and she is still in receivership as she's wrapping up some bill payments, etc. But May 1st is when the townships will be in receipt of the mausoleums, okay? You will be reminded that we executed an agreement with Ellenburg for them to do the entombments and to facilitate that on our behalf. And I'll be informing Tim tomorrow that Building and Grounds will begin starting May 1st, which is a Friday, the cleaning of the facilities, the the mowing of the grasses, etc. Okay, so I felt it was an appropriate time to put that into that discussion as it relates. Clinton County, I will show you something that is kind of becomes the bridge between the two. If those of you that have not seen it yet, excuse me, New York State has developed a New York State Department of Health COVID-19 tracker. This tracker is an interactive map, and it shows a dashboard of a number of things across the state. As you can see, this indicator is now showing 40 for Clinton County. Just earlier this day it was 39. And to date, over 321 people have been tested in the county. There has been some misinformation going on out in the county that only 12 tests are available per day. That is not how the decisions are made for testing. In fact, it's there's kind of a hierarchy as far as individuals to be tested for a number of reasons, and a testing doesn't necessarily present, you know, a quicker result for an individual to resolve their problems. Okay, many people or suspect cases are asked to hold in place at home. Okay, but I do want to let people know that misinformation about only 12 tests a day is inaccurate. For anybody that does hear that, let me stop sharing this and go back into it. In regards to the county, I'm very pleased that the county health department is going to be doing a daily briefing. They started it today. It was a little bit later getting out. Originally they were going to do a Facebook Live. They're going to record it and then post it on their social media accounts and also onto YouTube. It's a little bit easier for them to navigate. It is on their Facebook page now. It's also on YouTube. I strongly encourage you to check those out. I will try to send a link tomorrow. They are hoping to be published around 10:30 in the morning so that it gives kind of a preview as to, or an update as to what's been going on in the last 24 hours or so. Okay? On Fridays, they will be holding their regular weekly press conference. That will be on Facebook Live. It's where they'll have more speakers and then also be trying to take some questions. They felt that that was a little bit easier to facilitate than doing questions each day, but they are doing a phenomenal job in answering the phones, managing that to the best of their ability, and also answering questions on social media as they pop up. Some of the questions that have been answered in the past, they just aren't able to continue to answer the same one over and over. But if there's a theme or something that pops up, or something that is just outright wrong, they're doing their best to stay on top of it to kind of tamper down any of the misinformation or things that might have been miscommunicated somewhere else along the line. Law enforcement is playing a role in addition to the health department, and I want to explain this role a little bit because there's a little bit confusion about this. As I had noted, some individuals are being told that they need to stay in their house. They're actually being ordered by the health department to stay at their house. They're not going into the hospital to see that their COVID-19 is resolved, so they are getting a regular phone call from the Clinton County Health Department to make sure that they're in their home location or the location that they've told to hold in place. And then the Sheriff's Department will also be making a regular contact with them as well, okay? Among other things, law enforcement continues to do their daily job, as well as our first responders. I think people just need to be reminded of that. While they are trying times, everybody has stepped up and taken on the heavy lift. As it relates to the town of Plattsburgh, fairly late in the day yesterday, we were able to lock in some language with a notice, and the codes department made what I'm calling canvassing calls and outreach. They were literally picking up the phone and dialing in to talk with store managers, acting managers, representative on duty to the big box stores and other businesses throughout the community to make them aware that under the New York State Pause executive directive from the governor, our codes enforcement officers have local responsibilities for enforcement, okay, in addition to law enforcement. So they're their own category. We are actively working on educating people about that role and responsibility, and we are actively working on addressing issues and concerns that are presented to us in the public. So what the notice is telling the public is that our code enforcement officers, who by the way do have PPE, I have secured PPE for them, which is personal protective equipment, for them to be out in the public and to do random checks to make sure that they are following protocols. We've also asked the businesses if they have a formal document, guidance document, that we are collecting those. I'll give you an example. Walmart, for instance, has a fairly well-developed plan, and they have submitted that to us, and that is helpful. We're using that for a couple of different reasons. One is to see if they've developed something. Two, if there's another business that is at odds and not sure what they should be doing, we can share some samples and examples of what's going on within the community structure, okay? The Empire State Development Agency of the state continues to be the agency that is identifying those that are of essential businesses. There is a slight ebb and flow, change of direction sometimes that can occur. I'll give you an example. Golf courses in the original determination was given approval to be essential. They have since changed that. So it is on the onus is on the business to make sure that they are staying in compliance with the executive orders and directives. Okay? That's what our notice basically says. But we are going to do our best to first educate and inform, and then, if need be, to follow up with any penalties, and those penalties have quite the wide spectrum. All right. On Saturday, I have authorized Drew to work a partial day on Saturday, because we want people to understand that this is not a Monday through Friday compliance. This is a Monday through Sunday compliance. It being Easter weekend, it's a little bit limited, so I myself will be driving around town in one of the town vehicles on Sunday, just to be visible so that people have a sense that we're out and about. If I see anything that is really egregious, we will make attempts to work with law enforcement, etc., to address some of those things. But we're hoping that Sunday will be a little tampered down with it being Easter weekend and such. So again, it's about education, it's about enforcement, and it's about keeping our ear to the rail of what's coming down through the state. New York City is seeing what they believe to be a decrease in their numbers because of good social distancing. We, of course, in our population density is different than New York City, as we are different from the city of Plattsburgh. To update folks, the city of Plattsburgh has opted not to renew their curfew, so that should hopefully fall away as well, with any confusion of what the city was doing versus what we were doing. We did share all the documents for the code enforcement officers in my role as the municipal liaison for Office of Emergency Management's command structure. So all town supervisors, all mayors in the county have received the same documents from Department of State. Those documents in clarity just came over the last couple of days, and we needed to review them before we could act on them. But the businesses that we've interacted with thus far have been very positive, very appreciative of the outreach, actually, that it wasn't just someone was on site to drop the hammer, but they were checking in with them. And a great example is many of these businesses, the larger businesses, have either a national structure that they need to report to, or a regional manager, and they've been awaiting some clarity from them. So to have somebody at the local level reaching out to them, they were able to send that notice up the chain of command and get quicker responses than that they weren't getting on the local level before. So I think all is good. I want to thank Steve and Alan and Drew for all of their work that they have done already, and the work that they're going to continue to do in the weeks ahead. So last thing that I just want to talk about briefly is the planning board will be, as we've said before, conducting their meeting this month via Zoom. They will be dividing it out over 2 meetings, one for the quarry and one for the more traditional meeting going on. Trevor has done a phenomenal job working with Tim Palmer as the chair of that board, along with the members, to get them familiarized with the process and procedures to move that forward. It allows us to still meet the standards of good governance, transparency, but also to make sure that we are still moving projects along that have, certain requirements, and not lose critical, important time for projects, because many of them, a 1 month delay could turn into a many month delay because of the schedule that, these projects have. The Zoning Board of Appeals basically only had 1 or 2 agenda items. We opted to cancel that meeting so as not to muddy the waters any further. Those actions did not need to move. We felt that we could make the determination that it was not essential, so we would not hold the meeting this month. We anticipate that that meeting will occur next month, and we'll have learned some additional information by using the planning board as a learning opportunity, as well as an exercise in governance to adapt any additional practices for the ZBA moving forward too, okay? So similar fashion, we started with department heads, with the department head huddles, then we implemented it with our town board, implementing it with the planning board, implementing it with the ZBA, also the committee structure. I reminded department heads that if you would like to have a committee meeting, please reach out to them and we'll do our best to coordinate it. My recommendation is to have 1 or 2 different times in mind, so that it allows for some flexibility, so that we don't jam up the network, but we'll do our best to get you patched into that. So,
Michael, did you call the meeting to order?
no, this is just general kind of landscape stuff that I wanted to provide you all, okay?
Okay, I didn't know if you had to have public comment.
I will go to that. Is there anything for public comment this evening? I know no one's here at Town Hall, and it looks as though no one is physically in the room. So we officially logged on at 6, and I would say we would start our town business now, okay? Moving into that direction, we do have Pat on tonight. As I had told you, one of the first things that we did is to impose or stop any non-essential spending because of a number of things. We knew that the activity for COVID-19 would have many impacts financially. One of those being that we saw the writing on the wall was that they were going to close the Canadian border, and there was lots of conversations about what sales tax would look like. We know that sales tax is influenced greatly by things like the hotels, but also things like gas prices, right? So we wanted to take a very conservative approach to make sure that we could maintain our balance sheets, to protect our employees, the essential activities, the vital organs of the town body, which are our employees. Some of the items that may also further be impacted this year is the fact that some of the companies that we work with, as it relates to things like our capital plan, we did go out to bid previous to this, and we had some activities ready to move forward. We did issue a memo that said that we would continue to move forward as long as they could meet a couple of standards. The social distancing guidelines as presented by New York State, also that they understood that we may be at a reduced workforce ourselves, so anything that they would need from us, they would have to work through that. But the problem may be they may not be able to meet the standards of social distancing. They may not be able to have the supply chain resources that they need to actually do the work. So there may be a multitude of complications from that. We have canvassed the businesses and asked for them to respond to us to see what status we would have with these types of projects. I'm most interested, I don't want to say concerned, most interested in the projects that relate to the water capital plan. We've been doing some good work, but we want the public to know that we may need to bench some of these projects or put them on the sidelines for a while. Doesn't mean that we won't be doing them in the future, but they may be delayed this construction season or in 2020, even 2021, depending on what's going on, okay? I'm going to give just a couple other landscape things and then I'll open it up. I have been having conversations with Mike Zerlo, our county administrator. As soon as he is comfortable sharpening his pencil and getting some projections for sales tax, I will be sharing that with everybody. As you can imagine, one of the things that we were waiting for is the New York State budget to pass and to see how the state budget would impact the county budget and how that would impact the potential for the town budget. Excuse me. One of the things that I will say that is off the table this year for a couple of reasons is the traffic light at Ampersand and Ruger. One of them is from a financial standpoint, I think it's very prudent for us to take that off the table. Second is to get it coordinated with all of the players. Ron LaBerge is pretty confident that he feels as though a construction company could not get that project off the ground and it be a good project. So why stress over getting that up and running? So we'll take it, we'll reslate it for 2021, as long as obviously we're in a period to do something like that. So
there's actually a lot less traffic, so I don't think it's going to be as desperate this year.
it is, but you know, one of the things that I want to do though, Tom, is to communicate to the public some of the changes that we've made from a budgetary thing, but also a resources standpoint, to let people know that even though we're not doing it this year, that will again get back in the priority pipeline as soon as possible. You know, it's one of those things that we know through traffic counts that there is some, I don't know if I would quite put it in the category of a full failure, but we know that it's a stressed infrastructure, and that's why we wanted to do that traffic light. We can get through for a period longer, but we don't want to say, well, we're just going to take it off the table and then never get back to it. Okay. Paving is another example. It requires a certain amount of resources for a number of people to facilitate paving. We are having some conversations as it relates to Tim, and he's talking with the Cornell Cooperative and a number of other groups of what best practices are to achieve that. So we do not have, and as you know, we often will see a resolution about what roads or, you know, the highway department is looking to do. That is not before us yet because we're still trying to get our arms and mind wrapped around that. So it could potentially have some savings in some ways, but also knowing that the way that that's funded through CHIPS, it may put certain strains on us in future fiscal years. So we're trying to understand, if we don't exhaust a fund through CHIPS, will we get dinged in the future for some stuff? So we're learning things on a daily basis. With that, I know that I've said a lot. I appreciate your attention and your patience. I'll open it to the floor. Any questions or concerns?
Michael, with the 50% reduction in workforce, with buildings and grounds taking over the mausoleum, the normal spring, just if they were to try to maintain the parks, minimally grass, etc., how do we think that's going to look? Is there a plan?
Yeah.
Maybe alternate some days or scheduled hours during the day?
So one of the things that we can do under the 50% modeling is, you know, mowing. You don't have to worry about at the social distance and the same thing. So you could dispatch people to various areas. So we could potentially have more people on a couple of days a week in different areas of the town addressing things, you know, collaboratively. You could have one person do edging and weed whacking, for instance, one person mowing, and then kind of do one property and then move and do a cluster. I will bring that up to Tim to see how he wants to address it. But yes, there's some flexibility in some of that.
Okay. And the other question I have of that is the same with highway, as far as their typical spring cleanup. Obviously, there's going to be an impact on it. Does Tim have any type of plan?
Yeah, in fact, they've already started their spring cleanup, Chuck. There's a lot of things that they are able to begin in the locations where there are curbs. It is a little bit easier for them to facilitate with a smaller crew. When you get into the more rural parts of the community, where there isn't the curbs in some of the machinery that they need to use, that becomes a little bit more difficult. So they're doing the kind of uptown corridor where it's easier for smaller staff first, whereas they may have done some of a mixed bag of a little bit of uptown, a little bit of maybe Katie'ville, a little bit here, here, and here. So they're being very purposeful in what they're doing so far, in the hopes that we may see some of the restrictions ease up over time. We may find ourselves in a couple of weeks that, you know, we're still there, and then we'll have to kind of, you know, make those adjustments.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Michael, as we look at the scheduled activities, everybody's doing a really good job of considering the due process for our public to be informed. What about the grievance process that's coming up?
Yep, that's a great question, Barb. So just like we had said, kind of doing those steps of learning, the department head huddles to our boards, to the planning board. Brian has already been tasked to kind of keep it in the back of his head of what that will look like. We're looking for some recommendations through the Association of Towns. We'll obviously lean on Jim and others to do that. So more to come. I don't have the complete answer. The one thing that people should be very aware of, though, as it relates to grievance, I anticipate that this year, and if not this year, next year, will be one of the highest volumes of grievances that the town will have seen in a number of years, if not ever. And it's more likely again to be next year, because Brian tried to hold the line this year, knowing that there was going to be kind of the potential for an economic downturn in some areas.
Thanks, Michael, that's
Yeah.
why I brought it up.
Yep, great question. Other questions? I would like to volley something out to you. I believe, Meg and Chuck, you talked a little bit about this with Scott, and that is the potential for absolving penalties through the water bills for a period of time. I would like to formally recommend that that is an action that the town board does take. I'll explain it from a couple of different standpoints. One is, we are seeing a historic amount of unemployment, and a lot of folks are scrambling to get their finances in order because they're getting just gut punched in multiple ways, okay? If there's anything that we can do to ease a piece of that burden, I believe that that's something that we can do pretty easily for a short period of time. The other part to it is, I've asked Scott to consider, well, not consider, but to reevaluate the payment plan process, so that if an individual comes forward and self-identifies that they need to go on a potential payment plan, that we have that buttoned down to address that. So first, the first thing that we would do is to alleviate the penalties. Because the other part to it is, if a person doesn't pay penalties, it will be put on your land tax bill from the county at the end of the year. So you don't want to put the knife to them, you know, at the very end of the year either. So if we were to absolve them from the penalties, and then also to allow for individuals to self-identify for payment plans, we could do it on either an, one-to-one basis, or certain thresholds and stuff like that. From my finger on the pulse of the community, I do believe that that is something that people are going to come forward with. I'd like to get that prepared, and to at least say, we're still working on the payment plan process, but we can at least absolve you from the penalties as our first action of goodwill. Thoughts?
And we did discuss that, Michael, you know, about waiving penalties, and Meg can correct me if I'm wrong, the dollar amount for penalties in March was actually fairly minimal.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say $3,500, and it was actually less than it was a year ago. from what Scott explained to us in the software package, there is the ability within that package to set up a payment plan.
Mhm.
So he also, told us that that was gonna be very workable. So I would agree with both. I think if we can waive, the late fees and help folks out, with payment plans, I think we should, put forth that effort no matter what.
One of the things that I would like to do is not to have individuals have to request the waiver. The reason for that is I think it will become an administrative nightmare for tracking. I also believe that some people are very overwhelmed right now, that they may not think to even that that's an option, and then have to claw back if someone becomes aware of it. I'd like to just make it equitable across the board so that it's a position of the town for a period of time. If people support that general philosophy, I would work with Jim to draft a resolution so that that could be an action item for next week. I mean, so that we're kind of moving this out in front quickly.
Would it be a specific time that we stop this? It would be like till June or something like that, and we could extend it, or is it gonna be month to month, or how would we work it?
Well, let's talk about what are people inclined to do.
I would set a date, whether it be, the end of May, the end of June, whatever it may happen to be, subject to extension. I don't know how you would write that in the resolution.
Okay.
No, that can be easily written in, and that makes a lot of sense, because you have to have some criteria, and just saying, I think Michael's idea of letting, basically not notifying one or having people come in and make application now, that would be an administrative nightmare, just say,
Yeah.
if people can't make their payment on time, that we would waive whatever penalty there is and so forth, or whatever relief we want to give. I think we would have to do it, make it very broad, because, otherwise it could become quite a, complicated situation.
Pat, are there any other penalties that you can think of that we might want to consider in a similar category?
No, not that I know.
Okay.
I know with the water and sewer, we do bill monthly and we do bill quarterly, so we might wanna take those into consideration when we're picking dates.
Okay, great, thank you.
I would say just go till the end of June, say, and then we could renew it if we needed to.
Okay.
Yeah, what Chuck said, I think is a good idea, yeah, just, because, we have no idea how the economy may react, hopefully we'll get a lot better, but that may not be the case.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
And
I
water
think
is an optional thing.
What was that, Chuck?
And I think the billing's through the end of June, that, correct me if I'm wrong, Pat, but that quarter, that should be the end of the second quarter, so.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
For water goes through June 30th.
It depends on which book they're doing, or which section they're doing,
Okay,
but we'd have to look at that.
okay.
But we can find a a switch to identify so that, in a couple months or, that we're tracking it, and that if we need to renew it, we can certainly do that. Are people also in support of fleshing out, or revisiting, I should say, because we've done payment plans in the past, but to revisit the payment plan options and allow Scott as the department head to develop something through the water committee?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Meg and Chuck, would you just kind of keep that as a priority, just to have that conversation, to keep that moving forward? The sooner we can have it fleshed out, I think would be best, because as I was saying, as we all know, many people, as they're getting laid off, are making some of those critical decisions, and they're trying to line up their own balance sheets of how to run a household, so.
Michael, would this, payment plan be available to everybody?
I think it would have to be,
Yeah, I think otherwise.
has to be all customers in the areas of water and sewer.
I agree.
Yeah,
Residential and commercial, right? Residential?
yeah,
Commercial?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I would also,
How long would they have on the, payment plan? How far out are we looking to go?
that I think we need to we need to, you know, have the water committee maybe talk with Scott and see if he can identify some best practices, maybe through rural water or, you know, some other things, you know, and just kind of develop that. Also in consultation with you, Pat, so that, you know, it hits the books in a way that it's not so, hard to track it too, right? There has to be
I'm just
some,
worried about re-levy,
yeah,
because if you have a payment plan and people have balances, I just don't want us making an error, sending them a re-levy when it should be.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we can reach out to Scott and have a discussion with him. I know that he said it's very doable with the software packages they have.
Yeah,
So, and I think it would be important that, and I would think that there's some way that they would be able to do it, to actually get that so that it's on the bill itself. To contact water department, if you're gonna have problems making this payment, there are payment plans available, payment options available.
yeah,
They can add a note to the bills.
And I think it'd be good to convey it out. I don't know if that's something you would wanna necessarily slap in the paper or something, but I think if you get it on the bills, you know, that
yeah.
folks can reach out to us.
Yeah, and if you think of any other penalties that the scope of our authority as a town board, just let us know.
Yeah, I don't think we really have any of them.
Okay.
Because I don't think the court charges any kind of penalty, do they?
Well, not under the same, not on the same, under the same jurisdiction as ours. I know they have some state fees and such,
That's all,
yeah.
because we don't bill them.
Yeah. One of the other items that I'd like,
What about taxes?
yeah, I think that is also fair to look at too. Thoughts, opinions?
Pat, are you saying with taxes, you would have a payment plan?
No, I was saying the real property taxes, are we gonna waive any penalties on those, or,
Do we have the authority to do that?
I'm not sure.
I believe locally we can, and it's my understanding that the county is doing the same.
There might be some info out there of similar actions happening.
Yeah, we can do some more research on that.
I think it's worth discussing. I think the point.
I would just mention one thing, that would be helpful, I'm gonna check this out. Although the Association of Towns is closed, I had a question for Lori Mithun, actually on the town of Ellenburg. And great, I just left her a phone message, gave her the thing, and I think maybe an hour later, she gave me a perfect detailed answer. So if you or anybody else wants to call Association of Town, they're very responsive, although the office is closed.
Thank you. Not,
Michael?
yep,
Would we still be able to go ahead with the grant for Kevin's down in the, you know, Nick Ball? Would we still be able to continue on that particular grant?
have you gotten any updates on the grant, Kevin?
I haven't gotten anything. Maria McCashin is.
Can you hear Kevin?
I've emailed Maria McCashin, she hasn't gotten back to me, but that's understandable, the state's, right now, everybody's working out of their home.
Yeah, so he hasn't got any updates, as it relates to the grant. I would imagine that if we get a response and there's something that we would need to do, like anything, we would have a conversation about how to prioritize that. Grants are a little bit different for a number of reasons, Tom, so nothing like that is off the table. It would be vetted,
Okay.
yeah. Okay. One of the items that I would like to volley to committee for further investigation, it just happens it's the same two council people, but for recreation, I know that the seasons for a number of sports are coming up and that we have had open enrollment, but I do believe that we need to start making some decisions as a board about how we feel about things progressing. So if you could talk with Mel and Erin just to explore it, I think that would be an appropriate time. The Clinton County Youth Bureau did make some decisions about some of the activities that they're doing. Just because we've had online registration and enrollment for that type of stuff doesn't mean that we can't change direction, but now is the time for that committee and Mel and Erin to be engaged in a conversation to make some of those decisions. I'd rather make it earlier rather than later, largely to make sure that we're communicating with individuals and we're not confusing the message as far as what our expectations of people are for social distancing. You know, as a reminder, our parks, the physical parks are open, but the playground equipment, the basketball courts, the pickleball courts, the dog park, those are closed for access for people because we don't want people to get contaminated, okay?
Mel reached out to us last week and we're scheduling a committee meeting.
Perfect, perfect.
He actually sent me a message, just a short while ago, see if we could set up a Zoom, for Monday, 8 o'clock.
Great, okay.
So,
Uh,
she did send some information. I know the county did cancel, baseball, softball. I don't, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what she explained is they have not done any of the sign-ups yet for any of the summer programs. They've held off putting any of that up, but they're rapidly coming up on the time when they would.
Right,
So,
right.
I was going to get in a situation where we collect funds and have to get the money back to them. I think, to your point, we're better off making the decision early with it.
Yep. Yeah, from an administrative aspect of it, you know, the less we have to put burden on, you know, the finance and you know, Kevin from the clerk's office and stuff to do things twice just to do it twice, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You know, and publicly speaking, I want to acknowledge Mel and Erin because, you know, in times like this, we have to set forth the categories. One of the first meetings that we had, I think I told everyone that people fall into one of 4 categories. It's either high essential, mid-essential, low essential, non-essential. I really need to remind and want to remind individuals that when an employee is in a category of non-essential, that means that there are activities or events that are unfolding in that time that makes them non-essential, okay? A great example is recreation. Right now, we can't do a lot of recreating, right? We're limited because of social distance. That does not mean that the town of Plattsburgh does not value recreation or Mel and Erin. And I'll give you another example of how things can change fairly quickly. Once Brian is done with the annual roll, right, you can imagine that his position would change into a different category of non-essential, okay? So I just want to put that out to the public because sometimes there's a confusion. The essential, non-essential is language that is used in the public, and people don't always appreciate being put in that category, know what that category means, and sometimes to the public too, people say, well, that doesn't really speak to the values that you portray as a company or a municipality. Unfortunately, there's just some language that you have to use in the industry to go about your business. So, all right. Any other questions? Tom, are you on mute? Or did your
I'm
phone?
sorry, you said it wasn't essential, but there's so many that we're supposed to do every year, and if you get behind, you know, according to the state, you're supposed to have so many done. Is this, I mean, without doing any, I assume that some of them, you don't have to go to the home to do it, he just takes the measurements or something. So wouldn't that be essential to keep that up?
So what I'm saying is there's periods of non-essential versus non-essential all the time. So there's ebbs and flows to various positions and such. When it really comes down to it is, think of it this way, Tom. If the governor or the president of the United States said that we were on a true lockdown where people couldn't leave their house, which we are not in that position, okay, the town of Plattsburgh would operate as though it was a weekend, okay? Meaning only the truest essential life and safety of the water department, because you still need to have the water department guys going out doing their thing, and potentially the highway department plowing if that was something, okay? So there is a movement as far as what activities and things that need to get done. So yes, certain statutes and dates by which things need to be achieved, push people in and out of categories. Currently, Brian is an essential employee because he has a period of responsibility that he needs to report to. After the role is done, he may find himself in a period where he is not, and then he would go back into it when he needed to, start addressing some stuff. Pat, any questions or needs from you? Is there anything, thoughts and opinions? Just having you here to listen to us, I think, is helpful as we're digesting material.
No, I think we're just gonna be monitoring the budget very closely, and hopefully in a couple of weeks, we'll have our first sales tax check, so we can get a better handle on where that's going, and provide you with more information,
Yeah.
be informed in how the town stands.
Yeah, and the abstract, as you'll see, the number will, look smaller in periods of time. We do have a number of things that we still have to pay. We need to keep the lights on. We still need to, make sure that we have gas for the vehicles and things like that. So we have payroll. And special thanks again, really, to Barb and Chuck for continuing to be available for that. We talk about good governance, and you both have coordinated to make sure that you're not in there at the same time, but making sure that there's checks and balances. So thank you very much for that. So, all right. I don't see anything further. If there is nothing else, we will adjourn tonight's meeting at 6:45.
Yeah, I kind of like to know, in terms of the budget, we know we're not going to have the sales tax, and that's basically 80–90% of our general fund, and half almost of our highway fund. Should we consider borrowing at the 0% interest money to be able to continue payroll and things like that?
Tom, those are definitely some conversations that we will have in the future about what our long-term approach to thing is. And speaking with Pat and Mike Zerlo, we want to find out where we are with this most recent sales tax. It won't be the full predictor of where we go in the future, but it will give us a better sense of our current standing. So.
Well, I'm just considering the fact that they lowered the interest rates. It's down to 0%, and the last time we tried to borrow money, we waited too long and it went up. And as far as I'm concerned, if it's 0% and it doesn't cost us that much to borrow, we may have to consider doing that fairly soon before everybody else does.
We will have some further conversations on that, Tom. Thank you. No, it's a good thing to be aware of.
It's a little different with government though, because we have to go through bond council and everything else.
Right.
Quite a bit to the cost.
And in that regard, we are awaiting the period for our bond rating. Don't forget, we took out some money for our water capital plan. So we need to be looking at that on our sheets as well about what our impact will be for a bond rating. I don't want to say that we're at a AA or anything like that. We don't know where we're going to be, but we've been in a fairly strong position up until this point, and we want to make sure that we maintain our strength of position for future borrowing, because there could be a number of things coming down the pike that could be influencers one way or the other.
And I'm sure, Michael, that you're staying in contact with our state and federal representatives, because certainly it's not just the town of Plattsburgh that's in this boat right now. It's every single municipality, village, town, city, county in the states in the same boat. So, I think we just have to make sure that we're in good standing with those folks, which I know we are, and make sure that we're prepared, and say before, because I gotta believe that there's gonna be some relief there in some way, shape, or manner.
There is, and with New York State, that's probably the biggest piece that's most concerning to a lot of people, because what New York State has done in this budget process and it's not to finger wag, it's just the reality that we're in, they're breaking down that budget process into periods themselves. Okay? So the way that the state is impacted, doles out money or presents money, could impact the county, which then could impact the towns. So I've been in regular contact with Mike Zerlo, who hasn't pulled any punches, has been very professional, very above board. He's trying to get his arms wrapped around this. We're fighting two battles, right? We're fighting the health battle, and then we're also going to have to battle the economic situation that is occurring. And we are doing it in a parallel way to one another, but they kind of interweave at times. One of them will come to an end before the other, which we anticipate the pandemic, but we need to be prepared for how the economy will jumpstart or get it back on track, and how we're going to do that through the opportunities that are availed to our business communities, to the folks that are residential, right? Because people are going to have mortgages, and they're also going to have apartment, that they have to pay for, and I mean, there's just so many layers of complexity. It's like the worst trifle that nobody wants to eat.
Well, Michael, just to say, it's great to see everyone again, even if it's in little pictures, particularly Meg, who I haven't seen for a long time, and of course Pat. So I haven't been visiting the town that much, and I don't know if anybody's there when they are, but I really appreciate seeing everybody, and I appreciate everybody's participation.
Yeah, I miss everybody. I didn't realize how much of a social beast I am, but it's good to see all of you. Michael, thank you. I think if anything, it's a time for open communication. Never be scared of under-informing anybody.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
We're here to help you out.
No, I appreciate you. You folks have been great. Like many of you, I know that this is the new reality. You're on Zoom meetings or WebExes and things like that. So it's a two-way street. If you need something from me, please reach out. But thank you for all that you continue to do as public servants on behalf of the town. I know that you're doing everything in the best interest, and also doing it with compassion too. This is a time where we need more compassion. We need to be thinking of our fellow humans in these trying times, because not only are people sick, but their whole world is being tipped upside down, and it's very stressful. So stay safe, be well, and we'll talk soon. All right, we'll end at 6:52. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.